Because if someone's guard's up, you can say anything to them, I always say, they're not going to hear what you're saying.
They're not, no.
They're just going to come back. They're already thinking of a response to come back at you before you even say what you said.
Exactly right.
I think it's important in sales, but also in business. It's very important. In this episode of my podcast, Relentless Life on Your Terms, I sit down with Warwick Cavell, who, although was an introvert many, many years ago, for the last 25 years has been studying to be a communication expert and teaching people how to improve their business through strategy, having the right conversations, asking the right questions, but more importantly, listening to what your client, prospect, or the other person who you're having that communication with is. This is a great episode, and you'll definitely learn a lot about communication and business. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of my podcast, Relentless Life on Your Terms. I'm joined by Warwick Cavell. How are you?
Good, Chris. How are you?
Very good. Pleased to meet you. Now,
Yeah.
we met through a club that we go to called Club of United Business.
Yes, that's right.
A lot of entrepreneurs meet.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about yourself.
I formerly qualified as a chartered accountant. So
Sorry about that.
I always describe myself as a reformed chartered accountant, but I started with one of the big, well, it was a big 8 then, that's dating me, but it was called Arthur Young's, now Ernst & Young. And then I moved into a smaller practice, which became, was still a medium-sized practice, which became a first BDOs in Melbourne. And then I moved and set up my own accounting practice and ran that for about 7 or 8 years. And then sold that into a medium-sized firm in the city, and then decided I'm out of accounting and started working on strategy and management consultancy and did a lot of strategy work. So sort of my career's gone through 3 phases. 1 is the numbers, 2 is the strategy, and 3 then is strategy implementation, which is all about change management type role.
What is change management?
Well, it's about the people aspect of strategy. So it's looking at there's an expression that says culture kills strategy every time. And so it's looking at what I found was a lot of the strategy was hitting a brick wall. We weren't implementing as effectively with my clients as I would have liked. So I started to look at that change management aspect, which is the people, the human aspect. And I studied NLP and a few other things and started to work with that to
I love NLP.
strategy.
So it's basically getting the executive team to buy into a certain vision or strategy so they can implement and execute correctly.
Yeah, and it's modelling the behaviour that's required to be successful, basically. That's what, to me, NLP is about. So what sort of behaviours do we need to adopt and look at? And what sort of conversations do we need to be having in our organisations in order to be successful as a business? You can have a great strategy, but if people aren't on board with it and aren't having the right conversations, then it's going to struggle.
The conversations are going to leave attitude, they're going to leave what actions you take forward, and then ultimately how successful you'll be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I have a very simple model that basically says, look, your success and my success in business is largely down to one thing and one thing only, and that's your ability to influence others. Right? If you can't influence others, you don't have a business. And there's only 2 processes available to you to influence others: your conversations and your behaviours.
How to influence people.
Well, it is, yes, very much, yeah.
That's a great book, I'm sure you've read from Dale Carnegie. But yeah, it's very interesting because you break it down to the simplicity of it all. How you motivate and your actions, because your actions are going to determine. I did a post about this the other day, and I want people to lead by what I do, not what I say, because it's a lot more powerful.
Yep.
Because it resonates.
Yep.
Now, tell me a bit more about Linergy. Is that, did I pronounce it correctly?
Linergy, yep. Well, that was an organisation that I started many years ago now, and the name actually came from the concept of linking people for synergy. So that was
Linergy. I like it.
Linergy, yeah. So I pulled that together, and then some years ago, one of the questions I often ask my clients is if you could only do one thing in your business right now, what would it be to have the biggest impact? And so as a consultant, that was one of the questions.
It's a very good question.
And I would be hard on that question. It wasn't 2 things, 3 things, it was only 1. And it would get them thinking, and we'd discuss that, and they'd have a great conversation around that. But what happened a couple of years, years on, I was sitting down with a colleague of mine, and he just looked at me and he said, Warwick, well, you keep asking that question of others, when I ask it of you, of all the businesses that you've been in, if you could only do one thing that would have the maximum impact on those businesses,
great question,
what would it be? And my immediate answer, which sort of came off the top of my head, was I'd change the conversations. I'd change the way people communicated with each other. and then sort of sat there for a moment thinking, well, what have I said? And then that's where the concept of sort of
what does that mean
conversation.
exactly?
Well, it means that the way the processes that we use, every single outcome that we get in life is created by a process. Nothing just magically happens. So there's a process at work. And if you want to change your outcomes, what do you have to do?
Change your strategy,
change your process. And one of the key processes is your thinking process and your conversational process. And if we look back and you can see along the way, you think about the conversations you have in your head and you think about how they move and they cause you to take action. And then you retrace those steps. Sometimes they're invisible to you, but that's a process at work.
Sometimes it's subconscious.
It is a subconscious. And so a lot of the things that I'm doing is that in a business is that making, is really simplified by that particular model, is just looking at every single outcome is created by a process. If you want to change the outcomes, you've got to change the process. If you want to understand your current outcomes, you've got to realise that there's a process at work that creates them. And what we're doing is making the invisible visible, because people just don't see the process. They see the outcomes, but they don't see the process.
Well, sometimes they see the process, but they're not willing to have that conversation, that hard conversation.
Yes.
And I reflect back to a really good book by Kim Swat called Radical Candor, about having hard conversations and bringing them to the surface. And it really allows you to put things into perspective, but also strategize on how to move forward.
Yes, exactly.
And I think a lot of people, while they might know the answer, I can't have that discussion, because I don't feel comfortable. What's he going to say? What's he going to think? Is she going to ask me to do this? Is he going to ask me to do that? So I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, and the way I deal with that is saying it's not about phrasing it as a difficult conversation. To me, it's a challenging conversation, but it's not a threatening conversation. So in the profitable conversations model, I'll go through that. But you know, it's about how do you start a conversation like that, which otherwise might be difficult, but how do you manage that conversation to get to the real issues, to name the elephants in the room, but do it in a non-threatening manner? I
start with the end in mind.
Yep.
So I basically would walk in and say, what are the goals we're trying to achieve?
Yes.
Some of the benefits that I use the build, break, build, obviously, to get people engaged in what I'm saying. But understand the reason we're having this conversation is because we want this outcome.
Yes.
Doesn't matter who's doing things perfectly or who's not.
Yep.
We need to work synergistically to get this outcome.
Yep.
I usually start with that.
Yep.
And people feel a lot less threatened, because when you attack someone, they're going to put their guard up.
Yep.
And it's not going to be a productive conversation.
Yep.
It's not going to be fun for me. It's not going to be fun for the person. So I've always adopted that mentality in my business. And I've always found the conversations very open.
Yep, and I agree. But there are some traps even in that conversation. That's where I would normally start, exactly where you started, Chris, because start with the end in mind. So what does the end look like? Now what happens is in some of these conversations, you can get conversational drift. So what happens is that people start to paint the picture and we don't go far enough. So, you know, if I said to you, you know, this is what we're trying to create, I'd be asking you, what would that look like? What would be happening? What would be different from today? So what we try is to get this full sensory understanding of what the future looks like. Now, what you're going to find in that conversation when you're having it with other people, you are going to think, and they're probably going to ask you, but how do we do that? And I'm going to say, stop. You're into poor process straight away. We're not talking about the how, we're talking about the where. Let's just stay focused on the where. So good problem solving and good conversational structure is about staying focused on, recognise that we're talking about the end. You know, you talked about the end in mind. So let's
How does it feel? How does it look?
How does it feel? What does it look like?
They'll actually open up different neural pathways to think about a solution.
Exactly.
But also keep you true to your cause.
Exactly right. But people get into the how far too soon. So I'm watching that process. And then to me, then the next step is saying, okay, we've now very clear on where you want to go. It's a very clear painted, yep, that's something we must have. The next question is, well, where are you now? So what are the challenges you need to address? What do we need to address in this business today? 2 or 3 key challenges we need to address in this business today to get to that. So let's analyse that. And again, we're not asking you how you're going to address them. We just want to know what you're going to address. So what are the challenges? And then the final question is, well, how are we going to address those? But we break it down into that process, very simple process.
What's one piece of advice you can give to someone to improve their communication?
I guess it's an obvious one, but listening with the intent to understand, not with the intent to respond. To me, the biggest compliment you can pay anybody in any human relationship is listening. You don't have to agree, but you do have to listen. So if I'm listening to respond to you, I'm not listening.
So I always just say, are you hearing me or listening to me?
Yes.
So are you just using your ears, or you're comprehending what I'm saying to try to come up with? There's a big difference.
There's a huge difference. I mean, I was working with a board years ago that were really struggling with this issue. So I established a rule that said, okay, before you can respond to the other board member, you must, so if someone speaks, so if you speak, and then I want to say something against your proposal, I must first demonstrate that I've understood what you said. Otherwise, I don't have the right to speak. So what I would have to do is to repeat what you said to your satisfaction, right? And one of the board meetings...
That's fantastic.
Yeah, in one of the board meetings, because that just forces people to listen. In one of the board meetings, what actually happened was that this particular guy they'd been arguing over this for months, and nobody was listening to each other. And so what happened is, say Chris speaks up and puts his proposition, and Warwick here is trying to, I want to say something, but you know the rules, Warwick. You have to, so I try and explain it to you. You turn around and say to me, no, that's not what I said, Warwick. So I have another go, right, I've lost my turn now. And what do? I lean across to the person next door and say, well, what does Chris actually say? Now, it's teaching me, I've got to listen. I don't have the immediate right to respond unless I've listened to the other person. And so I needed to. And in the end, this particular person, we said, well, okay, you've now had the right to respond. You've expressed what Chris has said. What would you like to say? And he said, oh, I think I agree with Chris.
Because they're it's more. They're not being critical.
No.
They're participating in the conversation, but you can only do it when listening. Because if someone's guard's up, you can say anything to them. I always say they're not going to hear what you're saying.
They're not. No.
They're just going to come back. They're already thinking of a response to come back at you before you even said what you said.
Exactly right.
I think it's important in sales, but also in business. It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely core to me in establishing the right culture in the organisation. And as I said before, culture trumps strategy every single time. So it's about, do we actually listen? I don't have to agree with you, and you don't need me to agree with you. I mean, there's a great expression, Nancy Klein in her book, The Promise to Change is Everything. I promise not to interrupt, is she makes a comment that polarisation, we see a lot of in the world at the moment, is not caused by disagreement. It's caused by disconnection. That means people aren't listening to each other. They're just not, I've got my view of you, you've got your view of me, and we're listening through those filters, which is not listening at all.
That's interesting. Does make a big difference, I guess. In your opinion, what's more important, written communication or verbal?
I think verbal communication, the interaction between people is
I'm glad you said that, because my writing's terrible.
is critical, because I don't think we necessarily, we can comprehend well on written communication, but I think verbal communication to me is the interchange, because verbally, you and I sitting here, only something like 30% of all communication is the verbal, but it's the physical looking at you. But
audio,
the body language that you're using, and I get a sense of you much better because we're interacting like this. Whereas written, I've seen emails that have gone right off track because they've been totally misinterpreted, because there's no body language, there's no sense of context around it.
Well, I've seen, I said I'm always an old-fashioned person, so I want to get on the phone and have a chat. I want to meet you face to face. You can't do the same in an email, and I think it's a lot slower, not more effective. So what I do at Reventon is, in all my businesses, I pick up the phone if it's important, I have a conversation, and then I follow it up with a dot-pointed email.
Yep.
Because by the time I read someone's email like this, which is going to take me a day, it's going to take him 2 days to write it, how effective will you be?
Yep.
But I do think written communication is very important, but it should be concise, to the point, and clear.
Can I make one modification to that? And that is, be careful that you communicate in the preferred style of the receiver, not just your preferred style. So what I'm getting at there is, say, as an introvert, most introverts would prefer to get an email rather than the phone call, because introverts need time to think. So if you're an extrovert, you'll jump to the phone. That'll be your first course of action. But as an introvert, So what I tend to do is to say, okay, if I'm dealing with an introverted person, I give them a bit of warning. Let them know that I want to talk to them about X. And that's all and then give them the phone call.
So you give them the heads up. That's very interesting. So you're saying you're an introverted person, Warwick?
Yep.
And you're a communications expert for over 25 years?
Yeah. Well.
Wow, it's actually kind of ironic.
Yep. But as an introvert, I would, if you give me a phone call, if you just jump on the phone and you're talking about an important issue, I'm going yes. And what I'm actually saying yes is, yes, Chris, I'll consider it. And I want to get you off the phone.
Yeah,
why do I want to get you off the phone? So I can think about it. So if you had have emailed me first or had have said something to me first,
would have been a better conversation, would have been a better heads up.
Exactly. I don't need much time, but I do need some time. So I had an example of a couple of partners in accounting practice in Western Australia. One was very much an extrovert, one was an introvert. The tax guy was introvert, and they weren't getting along. So I said to them, tell me how you communicate. Tell me how you, and the extrovert said to me, I walked down to the introvert's office, stick my head in the door, and I want to know about this capital gains tax problem. I said, there's your fault. And he said, he said, why? Well, what response do you get from him? He said, I get this vague look, and he sort of looks at me, and we just don't hit it off. And I said, change it. Do one small thing that's different. He said, what do you mean? Go down, put your head in the door, and say, in a couple of minutes, I want to talk to you about this capital gains tax issue. I'm going to make a coffee. Would you like one? Go and make a coffee, come back to his room, see what the response is.
No way. Like this is, I've got to be honest with you, the amount of, I've learned so much from that because I never ever thought, I know there's introvert and extrovert, and that's, everyone knows that, but the communication style that you can get more out of an extrovert is amazing. Yeah. I learned so much from that.
Yeah, that's good. But
it's going to I have to make a coffee to everyone now, don't I?
Yeah, exactly right. But you need to know who you're talking to because you need to communicate in their preferred style if you want to get the best out of them. Now, it's just thinking about, okay, how do they prefer to communicate? Now, it's fine to use your preference, and I agree. I'd prefer to be on the phone in many situations, but I also recognise, so if you're bringing an introvert to the meeting, having an agenda is very important.
You see, for me, my point of view, and I'll share this with my audience, I like fast, effective, and I want to do it straight away.
Yep.
However, by communicating in this method with an introvert, it's going to be fast. It's just a different way to communicate with different people.
Yep.
I'm still going to get the outcome that I want. I just have to go about it slightly different because I'm dealing with different people.
That's
and
right.
I never would have thought of that before this conversation. Because for me, I'm always about, let's get to the conversation, let's deal with it, let's get it done.
Yep.
But I can do it faster with an introvert using these steps.
And if I called you into a meeting, being an extrovert, you'll make it up on the spot. You'll be very comfortable doing that. You'll ad lib. But an introvert needs to know what the meeting is about. They need to know what is on the agenda because otherwise they spend the first half of the meeting going, what's this meeting about? I need to know the big picture. I need to understand. And so you've lost them already and you're talking away thinking everything's fine and they're still trying to catch up with what's this meeting about?
I mean, look, they seem to know what they're talking about. They're nodding. If we got meeting left, I don't know what they're talking about. And always on that note, it's very important after a meeting to send action items and a meeting agenda is so important. But have action items and send an email out to everyone to make sure that everyone's on the same page because no point having meeting after meeting just to hear your own voice. So that's a very good point. And I can tell you, I really enjoyed that. Thanks for sharing that. Have you always been a great communicator?
No, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a great communicator. I think, there's an expression I always use that you teach what you most need to learn. And I think that because I need to learn these things, the best way to learn something is to go and teach it. So, because it requires you to do the groundwork and teaching it means that it gets it inside the head a lot better. So I think that one of the issues was that I identified that I wasn't a good communicator and I could be a lot more effective at communicating. But so to go out and let's start teaching it.
So what did you do about it?
Well, I did the NLP study.
You took action?
I took action.
In the long and short. So he wasn't good at communicating, he's a communicating expert now. I knew the answer when you said you're an extrovert. Were you always a good communicator? Obviously not. Yeah. But you got out of your comfort zone to become that. And now you've been teaching this stuff for 25 years. Do you think, this is another interesting question. Do you think problem solving as an entrepreneur is a skill that you've got or you can learn?
Oh, absolutely learn. Absolutely learn. I think there are natural people who are good problem solvers, but the essence is it can be taught, and that's partly or largely what I do, is to teach people the way to think through problems. I mean, I suggest that in our careers, that's what we do. That's what we get paid to do. That's what our jobs are about. Different jobs, different problems, but that's all we get paid to do is problem solving. Yet how many of us have had any formal problem solving training through our school years?
Okay, so this is an interesting question I have with so many people, and I have to ask it to you as well. Do you think a natural salesman can be born or made? Is it a naturally gifted athlete born or made? Because they're kind of one in the same question. Like we just asked with the introvert, and you said that's a taught skill.
Yep.
Natural ability, can it be taught?
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and I think that yes, yeah. So some of them are born, but can it be taught? Yes, absolutely. Will the taught ones perform as well as the?
That was my next question.
Yeah, as well. Is that really the goal? If I'm able to, if I've got a team of people, if I can lift their performance to 10, 15, 20%, they don't need to be as high as the stars, but if they lift their performance by 10, 15%, what happens to the organisation?
It all goes up.
It all goes up.
There's always a counter argument. You've seen people with all the ability in the world,
yeah,
they just don't want to put in the effort.
Yep.
And you've seen people that don't have that sort of ability, and they work their butt off at it to get great, and they might become great communicators, they might become great salespeople, they might become great athletes. So I guess it's very different in so many ways.
But see, one of the things that I see with the accounting profession is that it's a different form of selling. When you're the trusted advisor, you shouldn't be selling.
Trusted advisor, which is the key thing.
Yeah, you shouldn't be selling to me. It's a different conversation. It's not selling things to the client.
You're the doctor diagnosing them, as opposed to you're the expert.
Yeah,
that's the analogy we always use.
Yep, but that's only limiting. Being the expert in the current business environment is a limiting position to be in. But it's getting clients to buy without selling. That's the trick. And that's a different conversation.
I say that to our clients. I don't want you to buy anything from me. I don't want to sell anything. I want you to buy off me through a list of a process of education, which is very good. Now, you've done a bit of work for non-for-profits, haven't you?
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that, please.
Well, I'm a Rotarian, so I tend to work in the not-for-profit sector. So one of my clients, Travellers Aid, has been around for 100 years in Melbourne, and they escort people around the city, people with mobility issues. They started during the First World War, and the reason they started was actually that the men were off to war, and a lot of the women didn't feel comfortable with their children travelling around Melbourne. So what actually happened was that they then have these Travellers Aids who went out and helped them and took them around. Now it's expanded enormously. So going to the football, people in wheelchairs, they take them. People from the country coming down to a Collins Street doctor, they'll pick them up at the station, take them to the doctors, bring them back to the station, and
that's fantastic.
You know, so there's some, and I also get heavily involved in the mentoring. We do the mentoring of the Victoria Police, Ambulance Victoria, and I'm just about to start. I'm heavily involved in the project at the moment called, which is related to international student mentoring, socialisation. So there's a lot happening in the not-for-profit space that I'm heavily involved in. But that I still try and stick to my vocation of conversation. So mentoring is, you know, obviously just a conversation. So it's something I find exciting.
So now at the moment you're a business strategist, yeah?
Yeah, so do a lot of business strategy work. Yep.
So people will employ you, you'd go in there, help them with their communication styles, put some strategy in place and really take their business to the next level, correct?
So yeah, so firstly sort of, is the strategy right? Let's talk about the strategy, get the business strategy, and again, that's a conversation. That's all it is, right? Strategy is a conversation. So what is the right conversation to be having? Then the next stage is, okay, we need to now implement. So okay, what are the conversations we need to be having in this business in order to be implementing effectively? And that includes the problem-solving processes, because we are going to hit barriers. There's no doubt about that. But when we hit those barriers, the question is, do we have the problem-solving processes available to us to get around those barriers?
And like you said before, how do we have these conversations?
Yes, how do we have these conversations? In a way, you know, I think there's 5 elements to a profitable conversation. 1 is it's safe. 2 is it's accessible. 3, it's challenging, so that's not threatening. So if it's safe and accessible, you build high levels of trust.
And then you can grow.
And then
the third one's the growth, yeah?
The challenge, and then you need to be productive. So
what's the bottom 2 that's productive? What's
productive and connected. So
connected,
if we had,
productive, cool.
Yeah, so
can you just repeat the 5?
So it's safe, accessible, challenging, productive, and connected. They're the 5 elements that I use, like spokes on a wheel, to keep the high performance space open. And that's really, that space enables you to have these profitable conversations.
Well, look, I've enjoyed our time very much, Warwick. Thank you. Are you ready for our quick fire minute?
Yep.
All right,
I'll tell you afterwards whether I am.
let's begin. Tell me one unusual habit or absurd thing that you love.
Absurd thing. I guess I've started acting classes, so that was a bit of a twist, and that's really to try and break me out of the conventional ways of thinking. To
To push out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, push out of the comfort zone. Exactly.
I like your style, Warwick. I like your style. What motivates you to work hard?
People. I like working with people, and although an introvert, I need to retract back into my cave every now and again. I think just seeing the growth and development in people is really seeing them build their own capability. Build and develop. That's really what excites me.
That's so rewarding. When I see my clients purchase real estate and build their wealth, for me, that's everything.
Yeah.
Now, what's your favourite thing about your career?
I guess the variety is the answer. So I've enjoyed moving and having the different experiences, so that I've been in lots of different situations. So I facilitated the Melbourne Football Club's strategic plan that led up to the attempted merger with Hawthorn years ago. That was an exciting time, doing the strategic plan for the CFA. Just finding myself doing the split up of a council. So in the variety of problem solving situations and the contrasts have been exciting.
What was your proudest accomplishment?
Oh gee, proudest accomplishment, getting married and having 5 children.
You have 5 kids?
5 kids, yep.
No wonder you had to communicate well. How old?
The oldest is now 40, 41, 42.
So my age. Yeah. And the youngest?
The youngest is just turned 30.
Congratulations, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I've only got 4, so I'm laying behind a bit. Now,
I'm a slow learner. It took me a long time to work out what caused it. Now I know. It's holding hands.
I'll give you a crash course later. Now, what makes you laugh the most?
Irreverent jokes, I guess. I like irreverent things or things that are unexpected. Weird things. Yeah.
Favourite game or sport?
I guess I'd have to say Aussie rules, closely followed by cricket.
Okay. If you could eat one last meal, and that's it for you, what meal would that be?
Oh, I'd probably go for something boring like tacos. I enjoy tacos. Yeah.
What is the worst gift you've ever received? And apologise to anyone who has given him this gift. It was a bad gift, they should have thought better.
I don't know. I guess the immediate thought that comes to my mind is things that my mother used to give me, socks or hankies and stuff like that. So
that's all right. It's his mum, so it's not that bad. What is if you could have one superpower? What would you be? What would you have?
I guess the superpower would be to bring peace. Bring peace and harmony. Harmony is really important. So being able to operate in a turbulent environment, but still in a harmonious way.
I like it. What's your favourite family tradition?
I guess getting together at Christmas time. I guess that all the family likes all the kids and stuff. We have a really good family relationship, so we really enjoy each other's company. So that so Christmas time is a great time that we just never miss. And coming together for that is fantastic. Which is I've got 11 grandchildren now, so 5 kids and their partners and 11 grandchildren. It becomes fairly noisy.
That's fantastic. That's your true wealth.
Yep.
Now, for our listeners, give me 3 key takeaways that you want them to take away from our conversation. Now, you've shared a lot of great things about communicating, about strategy and about style. Give me 3 key things.
The key things that I would probably take away would be, one is listen. I mean,
what was that?
You've got to listen. Oh. So I got sucked in again.
I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
So I mean, almost the 3 things would be listen, listen, listen. But listen and then demonstrate the listening. And the second thing is learn how to ask what I'd call generative questions.
So when you said demonstrate the listening, because I want to bring this up and you brought it up, it's basically a technique that you shared is explain what you've just told me so I understand, then I can respond, yes?
Yep.
It's a very good technique.
Yeah, and the other part that, I always say to people, look, you demonstrate your ignorance when you tell. you demonstrate your intelligence when you ask. And so to me, it's about asking a generative question. Now, if I ask you a generative question, it causes you to think deeply. It causes you to think about where you're going, to buy into a situation. So I don't have to do all the work. As the questioner, I'm controlling the direction of the conversation. You're doing the thinking, and that's where the value is created. So the second, the tip is the third element is say, first of all is listen. Second is question, and the third one is understand how value is created. And value is not about what I do. We get sucked in as being the experts. I've got to tell you, you know, the doctor conversation, ask, diagnose, tell. Well, there's a different conversation. And it's about asking generative questions, because the value is determined by what you get, not by what I do. How are you better off because of what I do? And we tend not to ask.
Just to summarise that, so you're saying the value is not what I'm bringing, the value is the outcome that I created due to our conversation.
Exactly.
And that's a very, very important shift. People always say the value